Hey folks, welcome to Friendly Orbit, the podcast that draws us together no matter how far we fly. I'm Ceres, bringing you the answers to life, the universe, and everything, and I'm joined by...
Your local fantasy trope smasher, Theia.
I say the life, universe, and everything because it's episode 42. It has nothing to do with the topic,
No!
actually.
Wow! Whoa, that's awesome. We already at 42. I remember it wasn't that much time ago that we had like a whole thing about it being episode 30.
Yeah, it's 42. This is episode 42.
God, what are we doing with our lives?
But what are we doing with our lives tonight?
When we hit 52, that should be like a whole year.
Yeah, except for that we actually missed 2 weeks, so we're going to hit 52 at episode 50, which is aesthetically almost more pleasing.
God, what are we doing with our lives?
Making art. But what are we doing with our lives tonight?
So, well, today we are talking about tropey fantasy in D&D, old school D&D, and contrasted with the modern, more postmodern approach to fantasy in like general, but we're going to focus on D&D and TTRPGs and why we have moved in this direction, what was lost along the way, and how we can move forward from where we are now.
Reject modernity, embrace racist
Whatever.
elves.
No, well, embrace whatever Tolkien was doing, which is, oh no, racist elves.
Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
A city of marble burns. The orc siege engines fling burning projectiles against the pristine wall and buildings, reducing them to rubble. Lost beauty that this world will never see again. The rusty metal of the orcs' weapons clank against their shields in a barbaric chant every time the white stone crumbles. As the gate finally breaks, the front lines are met with a single paladin donning a white cloak and armor. He stands alone between the women and children of the city and the certain death by the orc's hand. Him alone and the faith in a better tomorrow. Now, the Paladin is the bad guy because actually this land used to belong to the orcs and the Geldovinian Empire is an imperialist force. This Paladin is basically a fascist, and by wielding a +5 Holy Avengers, he single-handedly wields way too much power for an individual. Also, his years of slaughter and battle have desensitized him to the killing. He suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, chronic depression, and complex PTSD. Also, are you picturing him as white? He's black. And half Goliath.
So what was that? What did that example serve to illustrate?
I don't know. You tell me.
All right. I'm going to go with, first off, that there is a beauty to simplicity in narrative. And through generations of building on fantasy, we start to think ever more as though we were inhabitants of a fantasy world rather than outside viewers, an audience to the fantasy world. And the more you get your head in it, the more you think about the nuances, the more you think about the complexities, the more everything becomes much more morally like nuanced, and all that complexity can take away some of the sort of simple fable-esque legendary shine of a moment, right? By saying, well, actually, but there's context to this conflict, and well, actually, there's context to this character, and well, actually, this character would have mental health issues at this point of their adventuring career, right? And those kinds of things. So that's the first thing that I noticed.
I'm telling you, man, we are one blazing saddles away from just killing the fantasy genre for like 20 years.
Yeah, you think it's that vulnerable?
Well, I mean, not really. I think that the fantasy genre is so much more broad in terms of what it can be compared to like traditional and spaghetti western movies.
Mm.
And we already have had our deconstructions and the deconstruction of the deconstruction. Uh, but like, I think there's definitely a similar trend where when a genre has existed for a long enough time, it's been deconstructed and analyzed for so long that its enjoyers eventually, like, it kind of like starts like collapsing in on itself.
Mm.
I don't think. I
I mean,
think
at
that like
some point, it's been deconstructed.
yeah, at some point it's been deconstructed, and then yeah, the good thing about fantasy in a way compared to something like Western
Mm.
is that like Western movies are about a real time in history
Mm-hmm.
with a very real like setting and
Mm.
with very real like it's bound by time in terms of like it can only exist within a certain century of history.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there's a limited amount of things you can do with the Western genre, and there's an unlimited amount of things you can do with the fantasy genre. So today, Brandon Sanderson writes fantasy novels which do tackle a lot of the issues that you just brought up, while still being interesting fantasy novels that you can read without feeling like you are just like stabbing Tolkien for 50 hours in your audiobook.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said also for the fact that by continuously accounting for all these, like, oh, but I also thought about that, and I also thought about that, and I thought about how this interacts with that. There's a lot of that, like, it can be a lot of wasted time if what you want is a whimsical fairy tale, if you want a dive into another world. I
Mhm.
think this is maybe also partially the difference between, like, someone who observes fantasy as someplace they want to visit for a moment versus viewing fantasy from the perspective as a space you want to inhabit. Um, that you want to like have a uh, to behave logically, or at least in somewhat similar ways to the real world, rather than to simply behave according to the sort of moral strictures of the setting or the intended narrative of the author.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm reminded of a YouTuber that we rarely bring up in this podcast called Matt Colville,
Uh huh.
and
Never heard of him. Who's that guy?
a video called Fantasy versus Fiction,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about how, like, to him, there's a distinction where fantasy is about telling a story in a world that reflects the external world building reflects the internal journey of the
Mm-hmm.
character. And that is, I think, the type of like fantasy that we think of when you think of Tolkien,
Mm-hmm.
where while Tolkien was a very hard world builder from certain points of views, his a lot of his world carried a lot of meaning, a lot of moral meaning, um, that was inherent in like the world building. Like the world building did kind of support was made to support this kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
But other worlds that are built more around what Matt Colville calls fiction are about more creating a not necessarily realistic, but like an immersive world which feels like its own thing. Like the characters are
Yeah.
living in this world, but this world could support many different stories because the setting exists uh, probably still to support the story, but it is not constructed to reflect the internal world of the main character. Of course, these two concepts are very vague, and I'm sure that there's a lot of stories that fall squarely in the middle. But I do think that in general, we have shifted a lot towards the fiction first approach. And that can be due to the rise of fandom and of fan fiction, for example, and the idea that, the author writes the story in the world, but then somebody else will take this world and write another story in it.
Mm-hmm.
And also just a general trend of like franchises
Mm-hmm.
becoming popular, and the idea that you
Well,
can have a
also, I
shared
mean,
world.
if you're speaking of a TTRPG, right?
Oh yeah, of
The
course, of course.
whole point is kind of to inhabit it. It is true some people play a very linear game in which one narrative and one narrative only will come out of the game. But generally speaking, by the virtue of the fact that the players make choices and those choices are unpredictable and improvised, it usually feels more like characters inhabiting a world than like a story with like a sort of set destination that's where the world isn't really the world. It's more about the characters, like you were saying.
Yeah, and the TTRPGs in general, like even if we disregard the type of stories that we tell, TTRPG companies publish setting books where the
Yeah.
world is designed to support a variety of adventures, which is up to the DM. And so the settings are designed to feel more like interesting places on their own that make you want to tell a story in them and not vice versa.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but basically, right, at the end of the day, when you start to have a lot of competing narratives, the only arbitrator you can use that sort of mediates between these narratives is some sort of sense of verisimilitude. When you
Yeah.
only have one story happening and you're in doubt as to what should happen next, the arbitrator could be whatever exemplifies Boromir's temptation for the ring is what happens next, right?
Yeah.
Or the circumstances are whatever heighten his character conflict, right? But then when you have his narrative and many other narratives interacting that start to have different messages and different morals and different scopes and scales, and then at some point it becomes very difficult to just be like, well, but what happens when when what would make sense to heighten Boromir's character conflict um, uh, invalidates the stakes of the dragon adventure that I'm running for this other group, right? And at that point, the mediator, the more stories you have, the less the mediator can be based around a specific character, a specific story's moral. The more the mediator has to just be plausibility. Well, a dragon is this strong and can, do this and that to an individual warrior, and so therefore the dragon comes out on top. And the
Hmm.
more that verisimilitude, i.e., the sense of realism within the world, becomes your arbitrator for what happens when you're in doubt of what should happen next, or the sequence of events that's occurring, the more it feels like fiction, right, and less like fantasy, because it feels like a world with an internal logic that operates according to certain parameters rather
Yeah.
than a world that reflects one character's journey or the message of one story.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And okay,
So
so
do
now
we
that
have
we
a
have talked
structure for
about,
today?
yeah, we have a bit of a structure. So now we've kind of addressed of like, what are we even talking about in terms of like, what is this phenomenon? Now
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear from you because you have more experience with older D&D, and you
Yeah.
have a person in your life who is a tad older than us and has
Yeah.
experienced an even older version of D&D in their life. And
Yeah.
so, why don't you tell me a little bit about like what traditional D&D was, not necessarily in terms of gameplay, but like
Yeah.
the world, the stories that you told. How was it defined? Because also it was before I let you loose.
Mm.
D&D started in the 1970s. That was a good like 25 years after Tolkien published The Lord of the Rings. So
Yeah.
the genre of fantasy had already gone through like more like 2 decades of development.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, as much as Tolkien is the father of modern of fantasy, pulp adventure magazines were as much an inspiration for D&D and the type of stories it wants to tell, um, as Tolkien's fantasy was.
Yeah, and I would argue a lot of the early stories of D&D, I mean, they obviously have that resemblance to Tolkien, but in many ways they're very different stories, right? Because they're like sword and sorcery stories. It's the Gilded Hole, and has very little to do in terms of like theme, or even again fantasy versus fiction. It's not that close to Tolkien necessarily. Okay, so my experience personally. So I started playing D&D when I was 6 years old, which is 20 years ago now. So 2005. And I played with my dad, and I think it's also safe to say that my dad's style was much less reflective of the 2005s as it was of his college years, where he wrote many of these adventures, and refined his personal DMing style. So when he learned the tools of the trade, so to speak. So I would say it was pretty old schooly. It was pretty old timey the way that we played. Now, we played in 3.5th edition. That's where we started. We eventually moved to Pathfinder and then to 5e. But most of the career that we played, most of the time, it was either 3.5th edition or Pathfinder. So while we were playing the new games, we were still playing old adventures. So much for context. The stories that we played with my dad were very linear. It was very much the expectation that the DM presents you a scenario, and you follow through that scenario to the end. Like, the entire adventure is pre-written by him. I want to make it clear, these aren't modules, right? Like, he's writing this story, but he wrote it 20 years ago in college, for instance, right? And tries to pretty much, there's very... It's pretty much written with the assumption that the players won't go off the rails. There's not a lot of guidance for if they do go off the rails. It's intentionally structured so that it's hard to go off the rails, right? So it's a very sort of DM directed, narrative forward sort of experience. Our stories were in a very disconnected world. There was no name for the world. The idea that you name your world something like Exandria or something was not really something I experienced until Critical Role. It was absolutely not the idea that you started on a continent with a name or even in a town with a name. You always started in this liminal vacuum of a space, and some prompt from the DM would draw you in to the local chapel priests who need help with something, or you're traveling down the road and see a sign for Tavern Town, and you'd be like, I've never heard of Tavern Town before. Is this a thing in this setting? And then the DM would be like, yeah, so you haven't heard much about Tavern Town, but this is what you've heard. And then you go into Tavern Town and you explore Tavern Town. And do you ever go back? No. All the other further adventures are going to be further prompts the DM gives you that you follow along with to other places and locations. So I just want to really highlight that it's really narrative focused, and it's really not a sandbox. It's like as opposite of a sandbox as you can imagine. There is no continent, there is no city or anything like that. And then you just get to say, oh, I want to check out the local forest, or oh, I want to do this, or oh, I brought a character who's into arcane research, so I want to find the nearest university. It's not at all like that. You just build your character and you show up, and then the story very directly prompts you to do a certain thing, right? The story might start with, you are in the crown room of Prince Rogant, and he is offering this quest to you to bring 3 powerful relics from his kingdom to a far-off kingdom in the north.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you just say yes to that, right? Like, it's not, there's no sense of like a sandbox of like moving around or things like that. And it was actually my influence. I talked to him about this at some point just because I thought it was interesting, that inspired my dad. Actually, maybe I could turn this into a setting. And he looked at the adventures that he had, and he was like, well, a lot of them involve druids, so maybe there'll be a druidic vale at the center of this map, and then maybe there'll be this other location, and things like that. But that was very much an after the fact sort of thing. So the idea that the idea that he even had a setting, that it could have a name, that there could be continents and states that were consistent and mattered from adventure to adventure, was completely foreign. Overall, as a surface level, that was my starting experience with D&D. I think that's already sufficient enough to sort of unpack some stuff and talk about.
Yeah. I think probably one of the more salient points of this episode will be talking about the way that we've changed, like talking about like lineages and like fantasy tropes. But
Okay.
I think that what you just said highlights something very interesting, which is the role of the player character. I think even today we still have modules that have like a more narrative structure, where the DM is supposed to kind of like guide the players through a series of plot points. But we definitely have the expectation now. The default expectation is that players will bring player characters to the adventure, which are more than just like a sheet of abilities. They are people with personalities and maybe some personal goals and an interesting backstory. And even if you're not playing a sandbox, the modules are designed to offer, usually in the beginning, in the character creation section, to offer the DM a series of ideas like, hey, these elements could be interesting prompts for player characters to tie their character into the story, so that even if the story is linear, the characters and the players and the DM are encouraged to work together to create a party that would go on this adventure, and that is like designed to have personal stakes in the adventure. And one thing that Matt Colville talks about in another one of his videos about old school D&D was that very much in those old stories, like the one you just said, essentially the motivation was always money. And then after that, after the adventure, there would be downtime, and in the downtime, everyone could use money to pursue their own goals. So the paladin could do paladin stuff, and the evil wizard could do evil wizard things. But on the adventure, everybody was always pursuing everyone was always pursuing like the same goal, which was getting money from a dungeon.
Yeah. For me also, one of the things that I want to highlight in difference to a module, so our adventures never lasted more than a level. And there was no cohesive campaign, at least. I mean, you would take the same characters on different adventures, but you wouldn't go level 1 to 12 doing Horde of the Dragon Queen. And it's all Horde of the Dragon Queen stuff all the time, right? Going level 1 to 12 would involve going on 12 separate adventures that each go in different directions and do different things. So I had one character who defended the keep on the Borderlands, and then went to a completely different location and competed for the Golden Toad, which was the artifact given out as a reward for like a bar crawl in Tavern Town. And then he...
Wait, Tavern Town is real?
Yeah, Tavern Town is real. All of the examples I've given are real.
Sorry, I thought Tavern Town was like a stand-in name for a town, which is like
no,
the town with a
Tavern
tavern.
is a town with 100 taverns.
That's
and
fun.
Yeah, you have to go through all the different taverns and do the different like little tavern mini games in order to win pieces of the Golden Toad, and then
Do you actually need to complete 100 minigames?
No, you don't actually have to compete 100. A big part of the adventure is trying to figure out which places even have a piece of the Golden Toad.
I see.
Because that's like kept very secretive because nobody wants to have their piece stolen, right? So yeah, but it was basically just like an outlet for, he was good at writing taverns and good at writing tavern mini games. And he was like, what if I did an adventure where that wasn't session 1? What if that was the A plot? What if the A plot was all these different taverns? And there were great taverns. There was like a lot of fun that he put into him. But then again, the same character, right, went into the Vale of the Druids, where special mushrooms can be picked that are extremely valuable, but you can't bring any weapons in, right? And then that same character went to find basically Moria, but it was called Kazalnar, a dwarven kingdom whose lower mines had been ruined, and you had to clear out the mines in order to, so that the dwarves could go back down to their homeland, right? And that same character would end up defending a cathedral from demons that were attacking it out in the middle of nowhere, this bastion of holiness, this bastion of light deep in the wilderness that needed to stay sacrosanct and needed to be protected from devils. So the point is that you weren't bound to a campaign. You weren't bound to an overall character motivation. You would go on a bunch of different little adventures. And each one would just encapsulate a level, and then between levels you would maybe that's what we did. We started working on financing a castle and building a laboratory and brewing potions to prepare for the next adventure, brewing and creating a magical library. We had a character who built an orphanage. So although not all of our adventures were financially motivated, sometimes it really was just to do the right thing. Those were the only two motivations. I want to make that really clear, right? It was either money or because in a vacuum, it's the right thing to do, right? It was never my character specifically has this goal to do whatever. It was just, well, my character likes money and my character likes being good.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. Right now I'm DMing a campaign that sounds, I'm the principal DM of a campaign that sounds an awful lot like that. Because I'm running this like campaign that we play every 2 weeks or so for a bunch of newbies. And it's supposed to be like a casual rotating DM chair, and so the premise, it's very much like one shots, where the consistency of the world building is not very important, and we have it's kind of the Suicide Squad style campaign premise, and so the motivations of the characters like don't matter for the plot. But they still have them. Like they still made characters that have like a personality and have a backstory that is why are they in prison in the first place. But I definitely don't design the stories to be linear. Like it's more like every one shot is like I bring them to a different little wonderland of things they can do and try out. Like it's Pirate Town, it's it's Cobalt Mountains, and then they're free to pursue their one goal, however they prefer. Anyways,
it's
that was
interesting
very,
also
very
though,
interesting.
because even in your example, you have a framing device that explains why these characters' motivations all align and why they go on a sequence of disconnected adventures together. Which was just an unexamined assumption of how we did it when I was a kid. The other thing was the stories were simpler, right? The orcs were bad and they were here to invade us, and you were going to go out and kill them. That's Keep on the Borderlands is basically that. There's a bunch of orcs and goblins on the edge of the kingdom, and they're going to attack the keep on the Borderlands, which is literally just called the keep. It doesn't have any name, it's not located by this river in the central dominance of the empire of whatever. It's just the keep on the Borderlands. And there's a bunch of like orcs and goblins out there, and they're all going to invade the keep. And my dad homebrewed a little bit. He brought in a DMPC of his. He brought in another character of a friend who was playing with us at the time, who had a high level character. But the point is, that adventure was just protect us from the orcs, right? And similarly with the cathedral adventure, it was protect the priest from the devils, right? There was always like a very clear sense of what the right thing was that you ought to do and who the bad guys were, right? And the trolls that lived down in Kazelnar, spoilers for Kazelnar players, I guess, were evil and had no redeeming qualities and were not really intelligent. I mean, they were intelligent, but they couldn't choose to be good. They were trolls. Trolls are evil. That's how it works. Trolls are evil, zombies are evil, dragons are evil, orcs are evil. There's no need in redeeming them, right? There's no need in thinking about how they think. They're here to be killed. On the road to Kazelnar, there is a group of about 10-ish hobgoblins that ambush you, and you kill them.
Mm-hmm.
They're just hobgoblins, right? We don't think about what the economic situations are that produce banditry. None of that is. They're just hobgoblins. They're just bad guys. They're just bad guys who are here. And a big part of them is like, ooh, they look spooky, like they look freaky. Like the first time my dad described them, he loved describing monsters in details and really showing you the sort of scariness of them, and he would sort of make the face that the monster would make. He's a good actor, so he's good at distorting his face into this monstrous shape to sort of show, oh yeah, they have these chins that stand out and these tusks and these pointy ears, and they're covered in fur, and they want to eat you, right? And so you just kill them. It wasn't that deep, right? You just killed them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes it can be deep without the orcs having to be people. See the Lord of the Rings. Like even Tolkien broke what before and after him have been tropes of the fantasy genre. For example, his orcs are not inherently evil monsters. His orcs were originally elves. Everything in Tolkien's world was originally good. And,
that's true, but they are kind of unredeemably evil by the time we encounter them.
By now they're unredeemably evil, right? Yeah, absolutely. But they are,
or like the Uruk-hai, who are like all products of rape.
Are they? I don't think they are.
They say that there's basically that they're the Oh, and now the Lord of the Rings fans are going to skewer me. If you're here, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Um,
Leave us a
uh,
comment, even if it's a hateful one. We
exactly.
read all of them.
But I remember something along the lines of they were made from the union of half goblins and orcs, and the half goblins are products of rape. And so, like, you know, I don't know. It's like that early presumption of D&D, right? In early D&D, the presumption was if you were half orc, probably one parent raped the other. There's not really a lot of other ways to sort of envision
Yeah.
that happening, or not a lot of other ways to slice how
Yeah.
that was going down. If you were a half
Well,
orc,
since we're going back in time, let's
yeah,
not pretend like one of your parents, your mom was raped.
yeah. I mean, probably, right? I, and And if you were a half orc, and my dad had a half orc character, it was an inherent savage and evilness to you that you had to actively try and overcome.
Yeah.
And his character, he had a half orc DMPC who was actually a great hero, but through being captured and having a helm of mind control on him, was the leader of the evil orc and goblin forces attacking the keep on the Borderlands. So he very much had this theme, right? This character had this theme of having some kind of orcish savageness to him, having some kind of latent evil he needed to overcome. Because even when he was, he was a hero, but then he gets turned evil again through the helm of opposite alignment. And, I mean, his name was Horse Eater. He fought with a two-headed flail. I mean, like, that was his last name. His first name was Golgoroth. But yeah, he was, you know, he was bad, right? He wasn't, if you look in the modern D&D orc section, half orcs don't even exist in 2024 D&D. But if you look at that section, the orcs are like cowboys, and they're nice and they're friendly, and there's baby orcs and adult orcs. The kind of orcs we played with in 2005 when I was a kid, if you couldn't play a full orc, I pitched my dad on playing a full orc, and he would be like, "But you'd just be evil though. Why would you play that?" And I'd be like, "No, this guy would be good." And he's like, "Why would you do that? That's just weird. If he's going to be good, play one of the good lineages."
Yeah.
That was sort of the assumption that I grew up with, right? That lineages were descriptive of, if you know whether or not you were good or evil. And if you were like playing a half orc, there was a lot of baggage to that. There's like yeah.
Yep. And it's interesting how things have changed, because we very much don't feel, or most people probably don't feel comfortable just creating orcs and calling them like deontologically evil creatures, right?
Yeah.
But
We've thought too much about it. We're like,
we've
why
thought too
can't
much
they
about
choose to be good? Why can't they be redeemed? What about their biology inherently necessitates their evilness? And once you say the word biology, you're halfway to being like, you're there already. You're uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you say the word biology and morality in the same sentence, you start to realize how uncomfortable it can be.
Yeah. And there is definitely a, like, one could say that, like, from a media analysis point of view, even bringing up the word biology with orcs kind of misses the point. Because a lot of the modern analysis and like of like the orcs and why we've turned them from evil to good kind of relies on this very literal reading of the material, right? Like, elves and orcs in Tolkien are not meant to be people. Like, they're not meant to be a biological lineage of people and one of them is inherently evil and one of them is inherently good. It's orcs are the industrialization, orcs are the machine of war, orcs are the corruption of the natural and the beautiful, and the elves, who are the oldest lineage of all, are the closest people to the embodiment of everything that is ancient and natural and pure in the world, unblemished by by industry and by corruption.
I
And
feel
I
like very
think,
much like the elves are closer to angels and the orcs are closer to devils, and neither are supposed to be really truly relatable or nuanced. If you want relatability and moral nuance, that's what the humans of the setting are for. That's why the
Yeah,
humans of the setting are fallible and honorable. Why Boromir and Aragorn both exist. Or Boromir and Faramir might even be a better example, right?
yeah, Boromir and
Um,
Faramir, yeah.
like
And you have,
the
yeah,
purpose of orcs is not for moral nuance. You're not really supposed to inhabit their perspective. That they're not supposed to be, representative of a lineage in their own right. They're just what you're supposed to be scared of, and the elves are just what you're supposed to aspire to.
yeah, exactly. Like I
The
mean,
actual
it wasn't
attainable
exactly
realm is
subtle
the
in
humans
my
in between.
starting narration in the city of marble burns and the orc siege engines fling burning projectiles. I mean, that was very much Minas Tirith, right?
No,
Yeah,
what?
shocker.
Shut up.
Yeah.
I was for a while. I was wondering, did you write this or did somebody else write this? And then,
Ah,
uh,
thank you. No,
and
I
then when
wrote
you did your
this.
twist, I was like, all right, he wrote this.
Yeah, no, I wrote this, but I appreciate the thought. So that was very much Minas Tirith, right? But like when Minas Tirith is being attacked by Sauron's forces, it's not it's not the realistic siege of Stalingrad by the German
Mm.
forces. It's the last bastion of like human morality and goodness and the beauty of the ancient world, making like the final stance against the forces of evil and industry and the cruelty of modernity. And that's what it is. It's a fight for the soul of this world, and the battle is won when humanity sets aside its internal, like its mistrust for each other, and the ancient alliance between Rohan and Gondor returns as the Gondorans show up to free the city.
Yeah, to give
It's
a slightly different example, right? Like in this siege, the resolution of the siege comes through hope and unity, and by living out the values that bring us closer to our ideal selves. In a different Sanderson siege that I can think of, the resolution to the siege is understanding a quirk of the innate magic system of the setting and exploiting it in order to have a technological advantage over the other side, which naturally results in the good guys winning,
Yeah.
right?
But to be fair to Sanderson, another Sanderson siege ends with a man standing by his principles and not giving into hopelessness, and most importantly, like giving up on morality in war.
Well, I don't think you need to be fair to Sanderson. I don't think it's a criticism to say that Sanderson's work is much more preoccupied with the verisimilitude and the plausibility of the logistics of the scenario, in
No, but
ways
I was saying
that are
like, to
not
be fair to,
important.
yeah. No, I mean, I wasn't reading it as a criticism, but I would just wanted to point out that like Sanderson in Stormlight Archive, Sanderson is more Tolkienian than he might be in other parts of his work. But like there are
Yeah.
parts of his work in Stormlight specifically, because morality plays such an interesting role in Stormlight Archive, where
And I would
his
say, right, he
fiction
has to work very, very hard to produce a fictional framework that plausibly produces that.
yes,
But if you're using plausibility and verisimilitude as your guide to produce a Tolkienian feeling, you're not doing the Tolkienian thing, right?
absolutely not.
Because similarly to what you were saying earlier with the Suicide Squad, if you have to create a framework that justifies why the story is the way it is, then you believe in that more than you believe in the story just being the way it is, right? Like if there's
Yeah,
no need to explain why
sure.
hope wins, then that means you believe in hope. If a complicated sequence of events means that logistically hope does still win in the end, you believe in logistics more than hope, right?
Yeah.
To some degree. I mean, that makes it sound worse than it is, but I hope you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. So we now live. Yeah. So this is. So now we've talked a little bit about like what the orcs are supposed to be, and then move the clock forward by 50 years or so. We go through everything that we
Also, the
talked
orcs
about
are
in the
kind of
beginning.
racist. I mean, that's also one thing to just put in, right? Like, part of changing attitude, like part of changing stories is our changing attitudes. We've moved from a world with simple answers that were racially charged. And we moved from a world with simple answers and clear, correct choices that were partially racially motivated and charged to a world with a lot more nuance in which race is perceived in a very different way. That has much less clear answers as to what the exact way forward is. And so we go from old stories that are somewhat racially charged, that have simple answers and focus on the obvious correct choices, to stories that are way more nuanced, focused on the details, and try to see everything from everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah, we have. Yeah, and like the more you take a world like the D&D world seriously, the more we start talking about things that maybe Tolkien didn't want to talk about, like how do the orcs even reproduce amongst them. The more we're like, but
what was
orcs must
Aragorn's
love their
tax
kids.
policy?
Yeah, like Aragorn's tax policy, but also just like what are the orc babies like? Are the orcs not capable of love at all? How do they take care of their young ones? And
Yeah.
very quickly the whole thing just falls apart.
How do they learn to speak? Have they really like
How do
no
they have
culture?
civilization?
There's not a specific food. Any specific food they prefer over others. There's nothing that needs to be taught or instructed. Like, this is how you hold a shield. We like to make shields that look like this. Even the military stuff, right, has culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And like technology, like is there no orc smith? Who makes their armor?
Yeah.
Is the orc smith constantly like enraged by the fact that he is not allowed to go to the human cities and plunder and rape as he pleases?
Also, I mean, are orcs just like robots, right? Like, are they just born with all the firmware they need? They're just like born with all the knowledge they need in order to engage with the world, and they literally do not have a learning process. Because in which case, I see why they don't deviate from the course that they're on. You know what I mean? I see why they're just unrepentantly evil. They literally can't learn.
Actually, orcs, they come out of the womb in armor.
In armor, yeah. Wielding a little Uruk-hai hooked sword.
Yeah, and then their growth, they mature in 5 minutes.
Well, I mean,
and
so
then they're done.
In all fairness, that's literally what they do in the Lord of the Rings movies, right? They're like, okay, Uruk-hai come out of pods. They're sliced out of pods, and they come out fully grown.
Produced. Yeah, that's true. But that's Uruk-hai that are made by Saruman are very much some kind of like industrial product. Like they're literally made in foundries like weapons. I don't know that Sauron does the same with the basic orcs.
We're not shown, but I'm saying like this idea is not too far off from what is portrayed, right?
That is true.
That orcs just kind of enter this world fully formed with everything they need.
Yep.
But anyways, the more you think about that, it starts to raise questions, right? It starts to raise these questions of verisimilitude and like, if you were to inhabit this world, how would you act, right?
Yeah.
And what could have been done is that every table sits down and decides on a compact. These are the themes the story is about. This is the moral of the story. So when in doubt, things in this direction will happen, right? And so your players might ask, right? You see like people be like, how do I get my players to engage with the story, right? Well, if you sat down ahead of time with them and you created this compact of your heroes will do this, and this is what the theme of the story is, and this is what you're going to try and do, right? You circumvent that. But what if you don't know what the story is about? What if you don't want to tell them what the future holds? What if you want them to tell you what the future holds, right? Well, then your arbitrating metric no longer becomes, you move from fantasy into fiction, right? You move towards the idea that there's a world with an internally consistent logic. And how do you operate in this world? Well, the same way you kind of operate in your own world, right? Things fall down, empires work like this, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, these worlds reflect our own much more closely. And we have to get into these details more.
Yeah. And so suddenly we move into what I would call modern, or rather almost postmodern storytelling. Because halflings can be violent criminals, elves can be brutal savages, orcs can be refined nobles, and maybe devils aren't as bad as you think.
Literally a hero option in Draw Steel.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, those devils are tieflings in D&D term. But yeah, sure.
But in Draw Steel's fiction, no, I think this is important to mention. In Draw Steel's fiction, they are literal escapees from hell.
That's true. And also,
and
just
it's
their
kind of
name
like,
is devil, which is already
and
a
it's
big difference.
It's a little bit odd if you think about it. You're like, wait, so is hell not a bad place? And I would say, if you really stick to the Matt Colville lore, it seems like hell has some bad actors, but it's not an inherently bad place. Which starts to raise the question: well, if I summon a random demon or devil, why don't some of the ones that are why do all the bad ones only ever show up? why don't ever these nice ones show up? Why isn't this devil worshipping cult actually super nice?
Yeah, that is precisely what I'm what I want to get at. Is just like, we have, what does devil even mean? What does being a devil mean? What does being a hobgoblin mean if in Morton Cannon's Guide to the Multiverse, the hobgoblin art is a bard hobgoblin with the same build as like a human, who just like has pointy ears and a bit of like some tusks, which okay, but like he just like cheerfully playing a lute, and the lute has a bit of like an axe coming at the end of the lute, the handle, almost like if it's an axe lute, which is like fun to look at. But also, how do you swing it?
Yeah.
Do you grab it by the chunky part?
You grab it by the part, where belly. You finger your chords.
Yeah, you grab it by the round belly that you usually finger, and instead you shove the whole fist in there, and then you swing it.
No, I don't think that's how you do it. I think you hold it from the one end. Anyways, okay. But yeah, I mean, so hobgoblins are kind of like, they're kind of like tall artsy dwarves now, right? Like, well, dwarves in the sense that they're inherently a little bit fighty, and they have like a lot of culture and song. That reminds me of dwarves, but they're tall, they're furry, they're nature aligned. But so they just become another like positive lineage tree to play, and then it becomes increasingly there's less and less evil humanoid lineages. We start to focus.
There is just like there's less of an identity to them, because your hobgoblin could be a wizard, and your world might have hobgoblins that are more arcane inclined, and maybe the orcs are actually architectural prodigies. Or maybe orcs aren't anything in particular, because this is very realistic, so the orcs are widespread in all societies, as are all the lineages, and suddenly being a dwarf or an orc is an aesthetic choice.
Yeah, it doesn't fundamentally matter to the nature of the character, in the sense that it doesn't constrain your options. And it is that sacrifice of certain options that makes something all the more resonant often, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I wouldn't even say that it constrains your options, because as of like 2014 D&D, if you wanted to play...
No. What I'm saying is it doesn't constrain your options, right?
Yeah,
if an orc can be anything, it doesn't constrain your character build options at all. Because...
But what I wanted to say was, like, as of 2014 D&D, for example, you could be a good orc.
Yeah.
That was
and your ability scores are now completely flexible, right?
But I think that what it still constrains is, what does it mean to be an orc? Even if you're a good orc, what does it mean to be an orc in your world?
Yeah, and so when I say it doesn't constrain your options at all, I mean, you can play a funny guy, you can play an investigative guy, you can play an interested guy, you can play a cleric guy, you can play a warrior guy, right? Like, the choice of orc doesn't constrain who your character can be in any meaningful way anymore.
Yes.
Right?
What I wanted to say is that in 2014, I think that there was still more of an idea of, like, you can be an investigative guy as an orc, sure. You can be a good paladin guy as an orc, absolutely. But the 2014 manual still gave you the idea that like there is orcs are something in this world, and there is something that they are not on average. And so if you go around with your orc character, the expectation is that people might be afraid of you, or they might ask questions. It doesn't make you constrain you, but there is a sense in this world that being an orc means something. And I think that since then we've come to a place where being an orc might not mean anything anymore. Like,
yeah, I think that's true. Like, I wanted, when I sat down to make my things, I was like, I don't like how in some like anime or stories, like you have a room of people together and you can't even tell who's who, right? It's like, oh yeah, this one's a devil, this one's a dragon, this one's a demon, but they're all like shapeshifted. They all look like humans, right? They all kind of interact the same way. It doesn't really mean anything to be any of these things, right? And so when I set out to make my setting, and that was like one of the things that bugs me, that I want it to mean something, that you're an orc. I want that to have some kind of connotation. But at the same time, I don't want orcs to be a racial stereotype, right? And we used to have many, many, many sentient lineages that were just inherently evil, and the way that you dealt with them was killing them. And as time goes on, I for sure, but I think audiences also broadly, have become more and more uncomfortable with the idea that the way that you deal with somebody who's intelligent and capable of choice and capable of changing their lives, and that how you get them to change their lives is not to kill them, right? Like that the correct solution for this kind of disagreement,
killing them will change their life.
Well, yeah,
that is a guarantee.
A dramatic shift,
yeah,
into zeroth gear. Yeah, so it's like you don't want to deal with them anymore. And for me personally, my guideline to this is like I have a whole framework of how I think of evil, and how I put evil into my setting now for this sort of modern world of fantasy. We want our evil to be non-sentient at this point, I think. And so that means that
or we
a
want
lot of fantasy baggage needs to be rewritten and needs to become this positive thing that you can play that is still not defined too much by its lineage, because by defining it by its lineage in a way that was evil, we've soured the concept of defining people by lineage. Which
or we can make choice, like either evil is non-sentient or evil is not inborn. We can still have evil hobgoblins, but maybe this time the evil hobgoblins are imperialists, and they have an empire, and that empire has subjugated and included other lineages in its army, and there is populations of hobgoblins that are also subjugated and are not like the dominant part of, like, the dominant culture, do not belong to the dominant culture of this empire. And maybe there's hobgoblins in other countries as well,
and that's the critical part.
Exactly.
You have to
and
show
there's nice
good
hobgoblins
to show that it's not a hobgoblin thing, it's the hobgoblin empire thing.
Exactly.
And this is one thing that, for example, Draw Steel and MCDM's Flee Mortals alleges to do, but doesn't really. Because they say, for example, all the goblins you see in this book, right, are like intelligent, but these are the bad goblins. They're not the good goblins, because you wouldn't fight the good goblins. So just basically, these are the bandits, the outcasts, the scum of their society. These are the bad goblins. That's why it's okay to fight these ones, right? They're bound together by bad character flaws, motivations, and decisions in their past. However, Draw Steel and Flee Mortals is less guilty of this, because Flee Mortals is a monster book, so they don't really have this obligation. But Draw Steel does not live up to the obligation of showing the good goblins. So you can say all the goblins we fight are actually bad goblins and good goblins do exist, but if you never show them to us, then you haven't really come up with your end of the bargain. And that's the thing. While we're on board to say, oh yeah, these goblins are bad, having to make a community of good goblins for many is then sometimes so counter-resonant, right? That it feels like, why have goblins? Just like, why do them at this point? Why not make up your own little tricksy vine elementals right? And call those your greenskins and go kill them, right?
Yeah.
And just be like, oh, well, they're forest spirits and they're inherently evil, right? And because they're forest spirits made by an evil god or whatever, right? But they're not sentient. They can't make choices. They're like devils. They're like demons, right? Or be like, oh,
And
these
to
are
be
just the bandit
fair,
elves.
yeah.
I'm just
And to
going to
be
put
fair, you
a bunch
could,
of bandit halflings. I'm going to put
yeah.
a bunch of just replace every mention of goblin with the word halfling and be like, all right, I like showing good halflings, so here are my good halflings and here's some bandit halflings.
Yeah. And to be fair, you can have like deontologically evil goblins, but you don't tell us that these are the evil goblins. That all goblins are evil. They don't have free choice. They're kind of like they're more monster, and they're not people. They're not
You have to get rid
sentient
of their
people.
ability to choose good,
Exactly.
basically. You have
It's
to
like
make them less and less human, but it's also something people are uncomfortable with, like having like a, something, because we've been told at this point that goblins are human, right? We see that goblins are human. So actually, in this setting, they're not human; they're subhuman. I don't know. I feel like that has some uncomfortability too, just because you're like, yeah, but I know that they're human from this other property. The resonance is driving me in an uncomfortable direction. So at that point,
yeah.
and that's the thing. A lot of fantasy, I think, a lot of fantasy tropes are positive in the sense that they give your world resonance. People know what to expect when they go to the Dwarven Kingdom. They know what to expect without you having to give them your 200-page primer on how the Dwarven Kingdom works. Unless dwarves don't work like dwarves in your setting. And goblins don't work like goblins in your setting. And orcs don't work like orcs in your setting. And if each of these packets of meaning actually are false flags steering people in the wrong direction, then why use them in a sense, right? You're not using resonance to your advantage. Resonance is your ball and chain.
Yeah. So speaking of resonance, I wanted to talk about what was lost.
Yeah.
I think that like with resonance you have already exactly, like resonance is already is a very good single word to describe what I was getting at. But I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. Like I wanted to flesh this out a little bit more. As you said, like each of these tropes carry meaning prepackaged in them. Like you see the goblins and you have already 5 movies of meaning packaged in the fact that those are goblins that you can draw from.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a similar phenomenon with like Western superhero comic books, where this is the 7th time we have rebooted Spider-Man, but even when you read issue 1 of the new run, you have those older runs with all the love that you carry that make you want to read this new run of Spider-Man. And while you watch him become Spider-Man for the first time, you're already thinking about that the cool time that he fought Dr. Octopus in Ultimate Spider-Man.
And
And
also, it makes the first time read a second time read, actually. While somebody else who's never heard of Spider-Man is reading this and goes, oh, radioactive spider, that's kind of retro and cute. You're reading it and you're going, oh, they changed this. Uncle Ben isn't here, right?
yeah,
And oh, that's interesting. Or somebody will make an in joke, right? Or there'll be a visual gag that only the enfranchised audience would understand. But for you, since you've read Spider-Man so many times, the first time you read this new edition, it's like you're reading it the third time. And there's that comfort, there's that hope, there's that ease of reading. You immediately understand what you're in for, and you're excited. You like what you're in for, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And there is and like it doesn't have to be just like I've read that book, but like some of these tropes are based in like centuries old or millennia old mythology. Like when we think of like more mythological monsters, when we think of the undead, Minotaur, exactly. Like, yeah, can a Minotaur really just be a guy who you meet at the local town fair and play arm wrestling with? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it could be, but now that Minotaur is so much less than what he was before, when he was the monster man of a maze and a horrific creature, half man, half beast.
And if you are familiar with the story of the Minotaur, and then you play your first ever D&D adventure, your first ever foray into fantasy, and you fight a Minotaur in a labyrinth, your brain goes, got it, checks out. It makes sense. Like, it gives you these handholds to get into the game, to get into the setting, and it gives you this ephemeral sense of rightness. Things are as you expect them to be, right? You have a pre-familiarity with the setting.
Mhm.
And so, fantasy often is really heavily front loaded with a lot of exposition. You have to know in this world the color purple means death, and the goblins of Galvaxion are different from the Eludani goblins or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And these are the 10 rules of surge binding, by the way, right? And there's so much for you to carry, so much for your brain to process. It's overwhelming. So it's really nice to be able to reach for resonance. The guy in big black spiky armor is the bad guy. It doesn't matter if you tuned out while I was explaining Galvaxis politics or whatever. The guy in big black spiky armor with skulls on it is the bad guy, right?
Exactly. Like, to go back to what I read in the beginning, in the first paragraph, you had so much context just from all the tropes.
Yeah.
And then in the second one, it was like, no, nothing is how it is. And actually, how can we even tell who's right here?
You can apply this even to imagine the metaphor of a computer. You're trying to work with a computer. There's symbols that you expect to mean certain things. A gear means settings, right? The Bluetooth symbol means Bluetooth, right?
Mhm.
The off button is a circle with a line through it. If you open up a computer and you click on the circle with the line through it to turn it off, and actually that pulls up the Bluetooth settings, it's confusing, it's frustrating, it's upsetting, it's annoying, right? It's counterintuitive, right? You want some elements of your setting to be intuitive for ease of access, for players to get into it, for it to feel right.
Yeah.
For it to connect to some part of their brain where they're like, yes, I'm in a fantasy world. This feels right. This is cool, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, as someone who does enjoy my D&D games, to play with tropes and expectations and to like reframe things. You have one described yourself as the like like you try to like you're like the DM equivalent of like a classic flavor bag of chips, and you try to deliver the best version of that classic flavor. And
Yeah.
then I am the I don't know what you said, but like some
You're the pizza flavored barbecue chicken ranch flavored chips that actually taste good, I guess.
thank you. But yeah, so and even as that, it's good to be able to rely on tropes, even to subvert them, because if my orcs are like one twist away from the classic orc, that one twist is more meaningful.
Yeah.
And it's helpful for me to give you the classic orcs, make you think these are classic orcs, and then put a switcheroo on you.
Yeah, you ready
And
for the inevitable pizza metaphor? If
no, I wanted to say the inevitable 3 examples from my orcs in Edge of Extinction, but you start with the pizza.
Well, I was just like, or just in general to use food, but let's say a pizza, right? You
Yeah.
eat a nice classic pepperoni pizza, right?
Mhm.
It's got cheese on it, it's got tomato sauce, it's got pepperoni slices. That's it, baby. That's all you need. And you eat it and you're like, yummy, a classic. And you eat it again, you go, yummy, a classic. And you then the millionth time in, you're like, man, I'm a little tired of pepperoni pizza. But then you get pepperoni pizza with anchovies on it. And you're like, oh, a small twist on an existing formula that works. I recognize it, but I also enjoy the freshness. Boy, am I happy. And, basically what I'm just trying to say is you want to have tropes for familiarity. You want to subvert them when they get stale. So you want to know your tropes so that you can use them some percentage of the time and subvert them some percentage of the time. Maybe I subvert them 10% of the time and Thea will subvert them 30% of the time. But if you're subverting them 100% of the time, then your pizza is covered with like anchovies, sauerkraut, and like chocolate fondue. It's fucking awful, right? I mean, at least it's completely unfamiliar. Maybe the flavor combination still works, but there's a large hurdle for you to order that, right? You're not just going to sit down and be like, "Oh yeah, my relaxing, enjoyable, familiar Thursday night meal, fondue pizza." right? So like you want to be aware of tropes so that you can subvert them, but also so that you use them. And often you
Yeah.
use them more than you subvert them, because if you start to subvert too much, they're just holding you back, right? People are like, oh, if I was expecting this to be a sweet dish, then yes, it tastes good to me. Have you ever had that? Where somebody says, oh, this flavor, and then you eat it and you don't like it, and it's like, actually no, it's this flavor, because your brain is like expecting one thing. Like if somebody says, oh, this is a nice mac and cheese, and you're like, oh, what? No, this isn't a mac and cheese. This is way too, sour. And what's this other flavor in it? No, it's not right. And if somebody goes, no, 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 this is a cream pasta with truffle in it, and you would eat it and you'd be like, ah, yes, exactly. Yeah, there's like, it's got a little bit of brightness to it, and there's that nice truffly flavor. Oh, I love it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah. Exactly. Absolutely. The it's also like the kind of like by the 100th time that like the door has been a mimic,
Yeah.
then the party just never trusts any door
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like tries to, and then like and the DM is like, oh, what, a door is just a door, how tropey. And it's like, yeah,
Exactly.
but you need to make 99% of your doors so that the mimic one is
It's
a
cool.
surprise. It's
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. Right? Like a surprise is cool, but all surprises is disorienting,
Yeah.
right?
So like in Edge of Extinction, I brought up 3 orcs 3 times as 3 different groups of orcs. The first time you met them, they kind of like ambushed you in within the Elysium, which is this isolationist land, and they're like kind of like living in the caves. They're very primitive,
Good.
and they ambushed you because like you got too close to the cave. But then it turns out that they were just like afraid you were here to attack them. They had been misled, and they have been living there as a community for like over a century because they were basically granted passage in, but then the people inside didn't like them, treated them poorly, and eventually they just moved until
Yeah.
they found like a hidden place in nature where they could just live
Yeah.
peacefully. And then later you were attacked by orcs who were invading, and they were also kind of like primitive, and they were riding these big bugs.
Mm.
So like, but like generally they were the barbaric orcs you would expect. But then later, talking to a general, you found out that, oh no, they are invading because they're literally going to die if they don't break into our lands and get
Yeah.
some food and shelter, because all of their food supplies have been depleted, and
Yeah.
now they have nowhere to go. And also the general is playing orcs against one another so that
Yeah.
they kill each other. And then finally the last orcs we had was like a telekinetic telepathic scion from a fallen empire that used psionics. And like this guy is like not primitive at all. He's a
Yeah.
refined uh person. He has an adopted daughter. He is a morally very questionable person, but he clearly has his own thing going on.
He's evil, but not orc evil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In the classic sort of Tolkienian orc sense, right? This is somebody who is making their own decisions, who has chosen
Yeah.
evil because they believe in the merits of their viewpoint, and is like an erudite individual who imposes their will on others rather than a mindless follower of a wizard or something.
Exactly. So like we could still have like a big battle where you killed 40 orcs, and you
Yeah.
could still have a boss battle with an orc boss, and you could still be ambushed by orcs in the forest. And I think that I did a good enough job at showing that like none of these people are acting this way because they're orcs. They're acting like this because they are the people that they are. But at the same time, the orcs were all kind of like living in this mountain area, and they adapted differently to it, but they all were like different from the humans and elves and halflings who live in the Elysium.
Yeah. So to summarize, older narratives could be less complex, involved less of you living in a world that worked by its own things, and more of a world working according to story parameters, narrative parameters, message parameters. Especially in the racial category, it was much more simple. This race was good, this race was evil, right? And this race was mixed. Um, Modern stories much more have you inhabiting a world. They are stories of much higher complexity that have a much higher barrier to entry in order to understand, that don't have nearly as much simple, clean resonance as old stories do, or often don't have that because it's sacrificed to complexity and nuanced and a detailed understanding of the world that you're inhabiting. So one of the things that we say we've lost is sort of resonance, right? I would say another thing is sort of like a simplicity.
Shorthand, kind of like meaning, shorthand of meaning. Whereas, like,
Yeah,
yes, the
that's
White
the
Knight, the
resonance.
Wet Knight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think also we've lost a sort of simplicity. You don't have as many stories anymore that are about the kingdom, with the king, who is lost and needs to be found in the forest. Right now, it's always, oh, these 17 political nations on the continent of blah 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 are at war over the tax
Yeah.
policies of Prince so and so, who has a semi illegitimate claim to the throne because,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Damn you,
So I
George
feel like
R. R.
there's a
Martin.
simplicity. Exactly, it's like George R. R. Martin. So I think there's a simplicity that's been lost. There's a resonance that's been lost, and there's a there's sort of a whimsy that's been lost. Hand in hand with the complexity of modern stories is often it feels like everything is so known. There's these gods, and they are known, and we live in this world, and that is known, and what's in this forest is mostly known, and the story is about the political intrigue between these people and those people. When you lived in the kingdom, on the forest, in the world, in the setting, right? Like my dad's setting didn't have a name, planet didn't have a name, the continent didn't have a name, the forest didn't have a name, the nations didn't have a name. It wasn't even clear if we were on a northern or a southern hemisphere, if there were two moons in the sky or only one. None of that, right? Like defining all those corners loses a bit of the whimsy. And I think, like, back in the day, you didn't get as much fantasy. So old fantasy is more aimed at people who sort of come, view it once, and then move on. Versus modern fantasy is much more like, no, if you want to spend 1,000 hours in this world, you can.
Yeah.
There's
Also,
these
fantasy
different
now
things.
is a lot more mainstream than it used to be.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that we think are lost. What have we gained from these changes?
Well, I think we have gained more. We've gained more interesting stories. We have gained more unexpected stories. We have gained the freedom to tell the stories that we want. But I think that we are ready for another, like, we are ready for a counter revolution to the revolution. We are ready
but before
for a synthesis.
I really want to touch on that. But before we do that, I do want to spend some time in what we've gained, because I feel like we've talked a lot about what we've lost, but I think there's a lot of value to what we've gained.
Well, I mean, a lot of the racial stuff that we discussed, I feel like, was underlying what we've gained, which
is an obvious gain, right?
Yeah.
But I think also living in a world, in a deep, complex world that operates according to verisimilitude, opens up options for stories where people guess what's going to happen, where like mysteries can be solved by the audience, like people predicting who Jon Snow's parents were, right? That was only possible in part because the world was so detailed, and because there were these hints, and because the world operates according to verisimilitude and not just according to what is honorable or good and right? And that is, I also would say that a story with a high barrier to entry doesn't have to be a bad thing. Stormlight Archive has such a huge barrier to entry. It is phenomenally huge. It is, I think, super nerdy, right? Like, you have to be a true blue dyed-in-the-wool nerd who is willing to listen to Alethi politics for at least a book and a half, right? But and not to diss Brandon Sanderson, he knew he was writing a fantasy epic, right? A fantasy epic requires a lot of work on the part of the reader to fucking get through it, you know? But he, in an excellent way, makes that journey so worth the ride that early on, you just feel like you're having fun. But especially later on, when everything starts paying off and coming together, you're like, man, what a symphony. And yes, there is a charm to one man on the corner fiddling on his bow, but there is a charm to a symphony playing together in perfect harmony, right? Like, a story with a lot of setup can be a story with a huge reward to it, right? That can be more deep and more meaningful, right? So I don't think complexity doesn't always have to be bad, right? And then like we said, there's the racism angle. There's the not relying on stereotypes angle, right? We live in a world where much of our politics and worldviews can be dominated by stereotypes, but more and more we are able to buck those. That is liberating. Liberating
Yeah.
stories are important, right? So, do any other positives of these changes come to mind for you?
Well, I wanted to say earlier, I brought up like let people tell the stories that they want.
Mm.
And I think that like an aspect of it that I wish to highlight is something that some of my favorite movie directors like to do, namely James Gunn and Guillermo del Toro, which
Mm-hmm.
is to tell the story of the monster, tell
Mm.
the side of the story of the monster, because monsters are often in like folklore
Mm.
have meant something, have been a cautionary tale, or embodied something the society was afraid of, and sometimes that thing was a something that those were legitimate concerns, like
Mm.
animals, predatory animals, like the rage of the storm, and dangerous people. But sometimes that
Well, or
thing was
also like
some,
the cautionary tale, right? Like for example, Rumpelstiltskin
yeah,
dies at the end of his story because of his own actions. Because he
yeah,
gets so mad that he can't control himself that he ends up damaging himself, right? Clearly
yeah.
that's immoral. Clearly the story is telling you keep a handle on your temper.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there is then there are sometimes the monster is a person,
Yeah.
or sometimes the monster feels a lot like a person, like a certain group of people that the society may not like for one reason or another, which can be sometimes racism, xenophobia, homophobia,
Mm.
and sometimes people from discriminated groups end up the monsters end up resonating with them. They end up
Yeah.
empathizing with them, and then we have auteurs who take that idea and build an entire career out of talking about monsters, good monsters, bad monsters, and so does Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy, or Pinocchio, or The Shape of Water.
Yeah.
Those stories are inherently trope breaking stories that recast traditionally monstrous creatures as misunderstood heroes or anti-heroes or tragic villains even, but
Yeah.
that there are people ultimately. And James Gunn does similar things with more mainstream action movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, Suicide Squad. I like to think in my head that James Gunn is like the Guillermo del Toro who says fuck.
Yeah, I agree though with like what you're saying. If we look at the examples of the stories that I played through as a character in 2005 when I first started to play D&D, these were not stories high in choice. There was one right thing to do and your character went off and did it, Um versus, in 2023, I was playing a tragically misguided sort of hero-ish character who does the right thing for the wrong reasons and loses himself along the way. That wasn't a story I could tell in D&D as a kid, right? Or even just to bring it to lineage, I couldn't play an orc. I couldn't play an orc in 2005. It didn't really make sense. It wasn't really resonant. It didn't really make sense. But now, as an adult in my own campaigns, I have players who are orcs and they play very interesting characters, and I've played orcs who are interesting and fun characters, right? Um, so you can point to very literal things like that you can do now that don't really work under the old framework, right? I got to
Yeah.
play an orc and it was sick.
It was sick indeed. So, yeah, I think, yeah, we've lost things, we've gained things, and I do think that we are ready to start re-engaging, I think, with the tropes. Like, we've gone far enough. The pendulum has swung far enough that we had the thesis, we had the antithesis. Now we can look forward towards a synthesis. And I'm not
Now
sure
we're going
what
to
that
make
is
half
exactly.
racist orc.
Yeah, exactly.
No. The synthesis was not a halfway point between the two. It'll take the best elements of each.
Yeah, we want resonating fantasy stories.
We want
That
resonant
like
stories without the racism, right?
yeah, we
We
want to take
want
the best of those tropes while leaving space for personal choice and self-expression.
yeah.
And maybe the key will be ultimately that we'll just have to like disentangle a little bit the story and what the people in the story look like, and that could mean a whole world of difference.
I mean that's for the racial part, right? Like you could taking the best of both worlds. You can make a simple black and white morality tale about this cowboy badass who is an orc and a good guy, right? That would be taking the one way to take the best of both worlds. I think I mean I have a few ideas of things that you can do, right? To sort of synthesize these ideas.
Yeah. Well, to be fair,
Um,
it's sorry, on the topic of the racist thing, I don't want to straying away too much from it. It's
mhm,
it's not just like the racist thing, but it's just like that which is like pleasant looking and good
mm,
looking isn't always morally good. Something we talked
mm,
about in our last episode. Check it out.
mm,
That which is natural is not necessarily always good, but at the same time, that which is natural is always not necessarily like savage and unrefined
yeah,
and somehow pure because it is unblemished by complex thought.
yeah,
There are more aesthetic tropes than just like the orcs have a vague similarity to Mongols.
yeah,
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you, but I wanted to highlight this point that the aesthetic thing is not just racism. Anyways,
yeah.
you go.
Well, I mean, so what are ways that we can synthesize things, right? One that seems easy is to not be afraid to use tropes from the past that aren't like racist and sexist and homophobic, right? Like having the bad guy wear spiky armor with skulls on it, right? Or getting to have a bad guy who is definitely
That
100%
that
evil.
literally that literally happened in history. We had bad guys in history who wore black uniforms with skulls on.
And so like you can use tropes, right,
Yes.
that have resonance in your story, just avoid the racist ones, right? Another is to not be afraid. Like George R. R. Martin has this quote where he's kind of talking down about Tolkien by saying, Tolkien doesn't consider the details of Aragorn's tax policy and whether or not Aragorn genocided the orcs. Tolkien just writes, and Aragorn was a wise and good king for the next 500 years or whatever, or 200 years. I don't know. Hey, Lord of the Rings stands. You're back. Comment again.
I think at best it's 100 years. I don't know how long Aragorn's lifespan is, but if he looks like that at 80, I think he has another 100 years.
I just imagine that anytime you say something wrong about Lord of the Rings, you like summon people who want to kindly correct you and show you the error of your
Well,
ways.
then I'll keep doing it so our views will finally go up.
They go through the roof.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Streamers
that
hate him. Find this
yeah.
one trick to boost your viewership.
Yeah, I think that Gandalf in D&D should have the wizard class, clearly, because he's a wizard.
Yeah, it's that easy.
Also,
Um,
Pippin is a barbarian. That's how he survives.
but yeah, so another thing that you can do, right, is so like sometimes it's seen like as a bad thing, like your world is somehow not thought through. I think you can wear it on your sleeve. I think you can say up front, this is a story that is more based on vibes, that is more based on a feeling, that is based on a message that you either share with your players or you keep to yourself. I would recommend sharing it. Themes that you can share with your players or keep to yourself. Again, I would recommend sharing them. But in order to make, you can have simple, like vibes driven stories where you haven't considered the politics or the economy of everything. That doesn't make your story bad. Just because somebody can nitpick the economies of your story doesn't make your story bad. Tangent, but that's also true for like movies and stuff. Like we had a whole era where it was like, this one thing in the movie isn't explained, the whole movie's trash. It's so unrealistic. And it's like, wow,
Yeah, and now you
being
have like
detail oriented.
The Disney sequels addressing BuzzFeed criticism of like, is
Yeah.
every single dancing plate in Be Our Guest a human? It's like,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
no, they're
you
dancing plates, but apparently in the live action remake they actually address it. And I'm like, no, they're not, but they actually say it. And you're like, God fucking damn it.
Yeah. And so like you don't have to do that. You don't have to think everything through. You can say I think you'll find that if you're playing with a group of players who are reasonable, they may well be very open to the idea that they're not thinking about that all the time and they're not criticizing that all the time. And they're open to say, is that really the way it is or am I overthinking it, DM? And you just
Yeah.
say to them you're overthinking it. And they're like, "All right, cool."
Yeah.
Right?
My next, like the next challenge that I'll pose myself in my next campaign that I'm starting to think about now is I want to tell a story in a soft world building game world. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna try to build a world that is soft, or at the very least significantly softer than what I'm comfortable with usually.
Yeah. Where like
Also,
things
I
just
wanted
happen,
to
and that's the nature of magic.
Yeah. Also, one thing that I wanted to point out is that in Puss in Boots 2, The Last Wish, the movie, it was so funny when it started, and like the literal opening of the story is like the screen goes dark, and like in a magical, whimsical characters, the words "this story is a fairy tale" show up.
Yeah.
And like I instantly, as soon as that showed up, I was like, okay, I know why this is here,
Yeah,
because
exactly. This is for BuzzFeed.
some little shit will go online and go like, oh, if Death wanted Puss in Boots dead, why did he fight him with the scythe? Does Death fight every single person it claims? Does
Yeah,
Death go
exactly.
to the hospital and like start swords fighting with every old person who has reached the end? And it's like, no.
Yeah. It's a fairy tale.
It's a metaphor.
It's not all. Yeah, that's the thing, right? When you say it's a metaphor, I feel like almost people like admit it's not all a metaphor, but it's metaphorical. It's it's not all. It's about the themes sometimes, the fantasy of it, right? But yeah, so I would say that I would say
Also, like, this
first
is
tip.
not a Shrek movie. Death will not like fart and
Yes.
then start complaining about like how after reaping, Death has to go back home to his bitch wife and his annoying daughter.
But I would say like my first tip, right? My first tip would be use the tropes that are still good, right? And don't touch the ones that are bad. That's one way to do it. The other is you can embrace having a simple story where you haven't thought through all the details and it's a little bit more of a fantasy and it's a little bit more vibes based and it's not all and it's just simpler and it's easy to get into. Talk to your group. I'm sure they will let you do that. But another one is drop all the tropes that are against your setting. Like if you don't want to do good and evil hobgoblins, nix the hobgoblins. Like there's no reason you need all 21 fantasy lineages that all have a history and have resonance in D&D. They don't all need to be in your game. You can cut all the ones that you don't want to do good and evil versions of, right?
Yeah.
Or if you don't want to fight sentient evil, don't fight sentient evil. Make a campaign about mankind versus nature. Make a campaign
Or
about
the hobgoblins
mankind
are
versus the devil invasion. Just use devils, use spirits, use zombies, right?
or make the
Use
hobgoblins flesh and metal monsters that are like
fight robots Matrix style or fight terrorists, right? Make it all about the cult of XYZ and anybody can be in it, right? Like but basically whenever you include a trope in your world, maybe try and think about what purpose it's serving, and if it doesn't serve a good purpose, if it doesn't fit well in the world, if the trope actually is pointing players in the opposite direction of who this lineage is, consider maybe just cutting them, right? You don't have to include orcs. If there's not a good way to put orcs in your setting, then don't include orcs. Same for elves, same for humans. So those are my main tips for like how to sort of synthesize the two, how to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. we'll see. We'll see how things will go. But I think that we will move in a slightly in a different direction over the next 10 years or so. And coincidentally, I think that we are. It's interesting. This year, Superman comes out, and to mark this change, almost, I want to say, we are going to have a Superman who is not a realistic depiction of what a person would be like if they were a god amongst men. But what if they were still just a boy from Kansas who wants to do the right thing?
Yeah.
And what if his dog had superpowers?
Yeah, like there's something refreshingly simple sometimes about being like I feel like for about 20 years it was like, I want to innovate on this story. What do? Push the verisimilitude button. But what if it was real? What would that really be like, right? And you just keep pushing that button over and over and over again, and like eventually you end up with reality. Muddy, complex, depressing often, sometimes very unsatisfying. You know, with no reality doesn't really have a moral to it, right?
Yeah.
And so then like there's no moral to the story, and it's like, what if we push a different button, right? What if we push like the whimsy button a few times, right? What if there wasn't a formulaic approach for reinventing stories that was always just more verisimilitude? What if actually each story was reinvented in its own way, which is best for that story, right?
Yeah. After the Call of Dutyization of the 2010s, we're gonna have the Fortnite-ification of the 2020s.
I would be totally down for more like niche, low stakes, whimsical stories like Puss in Boots. Although
we have
that one actually has kind of high stakes, but it's whimsical and it's personal.
Yeah, I mean, it's personal, right? It's not about saving the world or even saving the town. It's about saving your soul.
Yeah. So the stakes are high, but it's personal and it's whimsical.
Yeah.
You don't have to think it all through, right?
Yeah.
The map, the terrain on the map is a reflection of the person who holds it. How does that reflection exactly work? Shut up. This is how the map works, all right?
But also, that's literally, the world is a reflection of the internal struggle of the character.
Yeah,
I hadn't even considered that, but that's literally what happens in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Good discussion. Good discussion. Yeah. We had thesis, antithesis, maybe synthesis.
Yeah. We'll see what the future holds. Have any plugs?
I do. I want to plug Futurama. We already did a whole review of it, but it does get better. It does get better. And you guys remember maybe the rant I went on last time about solar opposites and how trying to reinvent the wheel and reinvent stories all the time got tiring to me because it just made the stories worse at some point. It's like, it's unexpected, but it's also not really satisfying. It doesn't really mean anything. And I realized, I'm in for more stories that mean something, that are trying to show me that Fry needs to learn to listen to his friends. Bender cares about his friends after all. Stuff like that. Farnsworth is too old to be inventing shit anymore. But maybe he could still pull one out. Anyways, the point is, it's not that Futurama has gotten so much better. It's gotten slightly better in the first few episodes already. Like, you can tell the budget's a little bit higher. They're doing some interesting stuff. I'm excited to see where this goes. Like, it's gotten enough better that I'm in for watching a few more episodes and seeing if it gets even better and to just keep on that trajectory. I still won't give it like a super high rating out of 10, but it was refreshing to me that the stories meant something, that there was some message to them, that they had like a 3-act structure. That they weren't just trying so hard all the time to like subvert everything. So very obviously connected to this episode, but the next few Futurama episodes were cool, and I will continuously update in the plugs if Futurama is getting better or worse. But for now, Futurama is kind of actually worth checking out.
Okay. Do I have any plugs? I don't really, I think.
All right, that's fine. So, that'll just about do it then for episode 42.
42
of the podcast. If you want more, you can find us on youtube.com/@afriendlyorbit, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you happen to have any astral echoes you want to share with us, you can email us at afriendlyorbit@gmail.com. All one word.
All right, Ceres, I'll talk to you later. And to all of our fellow Voyagers, we will catch you out there amongst the stars.
Fantasy stars.